Totoo esti live stream again. Como totoo esti nenga zabitak. Right, looks like we are live again. Again, we are live on Instagram. We are live on YouTube. And hungan nenga zabitak esti. We live on Facebook. No, nenga night zone route. Oh, hungan nenegi. Hungan live on. All right. Biba Biba. All right. Fede todos hamzu guanau hudzung estigin the webun episode Fanachu Guawi host Midzus in Michael Luhan Bavakwa. And for those of you who aren't aware, May is a special month because May is Museum Month. Hungan. And does that mean you get free entrance into the Guam Museum? Not necessarily, although there is a free decolonization exhibit that you can visit right now at the Guam Museum. Put favor, come on down to the Zengen Tihita Pues Hadzi exhibit. You can visit that. But May is Museum Month, and so for Fanatsu, we always try to do something special for Museum Month because, museums in the Marianas have an interesting history. And we want to get into that because museums are tied to colonization in the Marianas, but they're also intimately and sometimes beautifully tied to decolonization in the Marianas as well. And so I'm very excited to have with me today as a guest a colleague and a good friend of mine, Nicole Delisle Dueñas, who is the Archeological Collections Lab Manager at the Guam Cultural Repository. And Nicole has been, doing amazing work in recent years in terms of um, working with collections that the Guam Museum has been holding sometimes for decades and bringing new life to those collections, but also doing amazing work around rematriation, bringing collections that have been taken out of the Marianas and then bringing them back to our communities. The biggest of which is, of course, the historic Hornbostel return, which started last year with the Lati and other unique, rare, priceless artifacts that came back in the first wave, and more are coming this year. And so I'm so excited that Nicole is here so we can start Museum Month right, and she can talk to us about rematriation, indigenous, uh, indigenous collections, indigenous care, how we can bring these things into our work, both inside museums, but also sort of what do these things mean in the community as well? Because Nicole also brings to life these values in the community in her activism as well. And so, si dus masi Nicole para ifinatot mo para este na Fanatsu episode. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me here. Yeah, it's really a pleasure. We've been working so closely, since I've been at the repository. I think I feel like we're very lucky. We're very lucky to be in this work. I feel like I've always kind of spent my time on the outside of it, right? And I think all of us feel that way, right? With museums in general, but our museum's a little different. The Guam Museum's is much different. It's much more of a community space, and that's really thanks to a lot of the work that you and the team have been doing too. So, but I think there's this general sense that we've always felt like we're on the outside of this work, right? And then we are the people that are being exhibited by outsiders. And so now being a part of this work, it's just so meaningful and it's a collective work. It's not just me, it's the whole team here and the team at the museum. So we've been really busy. We've been, transferring over I think it's about 2,000 boxes now that we've transferred over from the museum to the repository. And even kind of ways that we're claiming and reclaiming this space itself, the repository. We know that it's been a very contentious issue around the repository and how it was framed as a mitigation for the desecration of land and ancestors and ancestral artifacts at the Marine base. So, we're all very aware of that history. So now with people like us kind of in this space, reclaiming some of our belongings from museums that are out that have been that outside of Guam has just been really, really meaningful. And I started off I did my I started off as a student in art history, and it was there that, like, I kind of found my place in museums, but I just didn't know um exactly, it took me a while to sort of navigate that, right? Because it was like, you know, art history is a very Western discipline, and it's like, kind of like the colonizers in art, and I spent a lot of time, trying to analyze and critique and figure out, what this all meant, like seeing Indigenous people sort of in these paintings and even Indigenous belongings in places like museums and far away from home. So that's kind of what brought me here. I started off as a exhibits and education programs manager at the Guam Museum back around 2016. Um, and then later got into the Micronesian Studies program, which is where I really started to do a lot of research on Hornbostel, kind of looking at the history of archaeology and the history of collecting and the history of sort of bringing these artifacts outside of Guam. So that's kind of where I started, and again, it's just really meaningful work to be doing with all of you. So um, we've been really working. I have to give a shout out to Vanessa Dueñas, the curation specialist. So she and I work very closely. She's kind of holds the lab down, the Cultural Repository Lab, and working together to kind of organize the collections that have come in and like stabilize and rehouse them and catalog them. And we're also working together on reviving our collection management system, the dreaded Past Perfect collection management system, a database that sort of catalogs everything, gives number, gives like thumbnail images, and allows us to kind of navigate the catalog in this digital way. So some of the really exciting work has been even how we're organizing these belongings of ours. Museums tend to organize their collection rooms by type, but we've been doing it by place and really centering place. And we've also been reaching out to families, the descendant community, working with descendants, so providing access whenever we can and centering family stories. We've also been taking in some research requests and access requests from cultural practitioners. So that's been some really exciting work.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
been.
Oh,
Mhm.
Nicole,
Go ahead. Yes.
Nango rocked up for what? Because you're talking about a bunch of things, and let me um let me just say, because if engin guaha question medyo por favor, hamzo ni enega, put it into the chat, into the live stream if you've got questions. But Nicole, if you want to, because you're bringing up a bunch of stuff, if you want, because you brought up families visiting artifacts, if you want me to share some of the images, I can. But if you want to come back to it, just let me know.
No, let's go ahead and throw those
Okay.
up now. There's some good images here.
But
Uh,
before we move on to that though, I wanted to give you a chance because a bunch of people, Timatungo Trabianai, they aren't sure what the Guam Cultural Repository is though. And so if you want to just give a little bit of a just an introduction, like what is the Guam Cultural Repository? Because I know some people have asked me, they said, "Oh, isn't that where like John F. Kennedy Jr. was shot? He was shot from like the Dallas Book Repository and stuff like that." And so can you just tell us a little bit like what is the Guam Cultural Repository? And then I think it'll help people understand like why the work that you're going to share with us is so exciting.
Oh yeah, for sure. So my understanding is the repository was a part of this larger plan. Um, Around the 90s, there was an idea to sort of have a museum network, and so that included the Guam Museum, and then also a depository, which holds the collections of the museum. So uh, when the uh, when the buildup started happening and there were some of the materials, some of the ancestral artifacts and materials that were being uncovered during that construction, it was our people who had sort of Shippo Linda Uggan, I believe, in particular, who had negotiated the building of the repository with DoD money ultimately. And so that's where that controversy had come in and around the understanding of this repository. However, this repository, this place for holding and safekeeping of our ancestral artifacts and materials, is ours, is ours. And so we're located in Mindanao on the University of Guam campus. We are under the Department of Chamorro Affairs, and sort of a sister entity to the Guam Museum. And as some people have kind of referred to us as the back of the house of the museum. So we have, a research room where people come in and kind of visit with some of the artifacts, and then we have a few collection rooms. So we've been transferring over a lot of the collections that were at one point housed over at like the DNA building, and it's kind of moved around, right? Because the Guam Museum doesn't have a lot of space, so we're kind of that space for the Guam Museum. We're like the with the safekeeping and holders of the collection.
Again, it's so appreciated. And I have to say, because the Guam Museum's own repository or storage annex, whatever word you want to use, is kindly, generously donated by Phil Flores, free of charge. But it is an office. It's an office building. It's just the floor of an office building. And so to be able to bring out thousands of boxes of archaeological collections, some of which, as you've seen, haven't been looked at or opened for decades, and then to then bring them into the repository where you and the staff can not just rebox them, cannot just assess them, but also can open them up, and also then go about the work of starting research on them, kind of trying to find the reports, like can we find out more information? Because sometimes there's just a box and it's artifacts, but there's no information beyond it. And so it's amazing the work that has been done at the repository in terms of bringing, because the artifacts themselves are beautiful, but the more that can be done to connect it to where does it come from, and then also as we can talk about next, like the living families today
Mhm.
that are connected to these places. And so you were mentioning that even you've piloted or you've been inviting people that have ancestral ties to some of these artifacts, to some of the locations where these collections come from. And so you've shared some images with me, and so let's talk about these.
Right. Yeah, so our records division is headed up by Charlene Flores, and yeah, it's really just, we're bringing over these boxes and opening them, some of them for the first time in decades, and now trying to tell the story of them. Um Char's focus is to find the reports for them so we can start including these. Of course, these should always accompany the collections and gives context to the collections. But even further than that, to give context to these collections is we've been reaching out to the families from the area to come and visit with these artifacts. And that's where there's been some just really exciting stories that they're sharing, some of the oral histories, again, recentering place in the context of these pieces and really hearing their stories about these places. So here was one of the biggest collections that come to the repository from the Guam Museum's interim repository space has been from an area called Matsum. Other people call it Pocket. And more recently, we've uncovered that this place was also called Nasian. And this is where Mangilao Golf Course is currently located. So Tonya McDaniel, who's a museum assistant, it was great. Her family, they used to ranch in that area. So she brought in her dad and her uncles and her mom to come and see these pieces. And already they just started kind of reminiscing and talking about some of these stories that they remember growing up in that area, and some of them very sacred stories too of like the Tautamona and like visions that they had. And so, so when we're thinking about contextualizing a collection and these materials, yes, the archaeological reports, absolutely, but also the importance of kind of reconnecting with family, with the people, with the community, with the descendants, and with place. So that's been some of the really great work that we've been involved with.
Oh man, that is for me, this is so inspiring to hear and on so many levels. Because first off, I mean, the Mingilao golf course, it's easy to just see the island and see golf courses and then forget that there was anything there before there was a golf course. And even if you go to some of these tourist places and you ask them, hey, was there anything here before there? The staff there has no idea about it. And so I know that even part of your work and part of your team's work has been to actually try to engage the people at the Manila Golf Course and find, because as part of this work you found maps for the Lati and other things and all sorts of stuff, and really trying to bring to life which was an old and ancient village which existed there. The artifacts were there, the Lati were there, and only recently did it become a golf course and a place where people can get their lunch with a beautiful view of the eastern coast of Guam.
Yeah, this was a really interesting, this is such an interesting place. And the late that we visited Mingilao Golf Course a couple of times, but the latest visit we went with Tonya joined us, Tonya McDaniel, and we also went with Mike Clements and Larry Regatal. And their interest was kind of looking at it because there is the story of the Chamorros who lived at Nasihan, taking their canoes from Nasihan and going to Hanum to help the Spanish uh, quell a particularly stronghold, Chamorro stronghold and resistance. They were resisting the Spanish and at Hanum. So we were really interested in the story, and we went together and Larry um, was was looking at the channel and really trying to see like in the landscape like how the canoes would have come out from that east side of Guam. And being together in that space and kind of just like visualizing the village that was there. We kind of crossed one of the borders. There's a barrier there, and we kind of crossed that barrier. And just as soon as you cross that barrier, you can see just pottery everywhere. But again, the staff from Mingilao Golf Course, they're not aware of the village that was there, and there are lati there. We have diagrams that were found in the archaeological report, but they're not necessarily cared for right now, and they're kind of overgrown. So I think one project that we can work together on, with Mike Clement, the Guam Museum, and the Shippo's office is, creating signage. There's again the staff at the golf course had no awareness of the Lati there. We asked them about the Lati the first time we were in there, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have Lati there." But there are a lot of stories of that place, and a lot of people I think, are aware of like some of the Tautakmono stories of Mingilao Golf Course. You hear of um, when it was first being built, there was a backhoe that was like that broke, couldn't get through a rock, and then the next day when they brought a new backhoe in, it was turned over. And then there was another story of they were playing golf, and when they had hit the golf ball into the jungle, the golf ball came flying back. So there's all these really interesting stories, and any other families, of course, that are tied to this area. We invite people to reach out and come visit with the pieces, and reconnect, or connect with. We're always open to that.
Oh, Biba, Biba. This is a this is so exciting to it is so exciting to hear about this. Um, and I'm hoping, and it's the type of work that museums, repositories, should engage in, is that the work of a museum, it can start behind the walls of a museum, but because, and the things that we care for don't belong within the walls of a museum. I think from everything that you've shared, the work has to extend out into the community. It has to go by definition beyond. And so it's inspiring to hear how you and others at the repository and at the museum, how that work is being done. And so let's talk. I've already gotten people that are asking about, show us the jewelry, show us the artifacts, show us the stuff from the Bishop Museum. And so um, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the historic return from that. And before we get to this though, because I want to give you a chance to explain it, because somebody had already messaged ahead of the episode and asked, what is the difference between a rematriation and a repatriation? And so if you want to kind of just give any sort of discussion on that, just to help those who might be confused, or just might want to know a little bit more about why would we want to use the word rematriation as opposed to repatriation? Is there a reason why? And so your thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, definitely. So the term rematriation, gosh, I can't remember. It was maybe in the 70s. It was really popularized by a native feminist, wasn't it Lee Miracle, that's what I mean. And and so it is, yeah, so yeah, Lee Miracle. And it is it's also a kind of a lens in which we do this work. And so so it's a Indigenous feminist sort of movement, and a lens in which we're kind of doing this work. And it doesn't pertain only to museum work. It's also tied to uh, land restoration and land back movement. And whereas repatriation, kind of in the museum context, uh, entails the return of materials to the place of origin. Rematriation kind of goes further, and instead of and on in addition to the return, it's also kind of a return, particularly to that descendant community and to that land. And some other example of and you know, it makes so much sense too for us doing this work too. There's a lot of women who are doing this work that you've been so lucky to do this work with too. So I think, you know, it's kind of like you had the Fanachu a few months ago or about a month ago with Bal, and he was Baltasar Ucken. When he was talking about DNA, and he was talking about you know, we are the reborn ancient daughters and mothers, right? So, you know, there a lot of us have been kind of in this work with the recentering of land. And so bringing these artifacts home, not just to place in the museum, but bringing them home to kind of reconnect with family, to reconnect with the descendants and the community. So that's kind of where the difference is. It's looking at repatriation through an Indigenous feminist lens and the lens of decolonization. So and the example of our work with the Bishop Museum and the Hornbostel collection. The Bishop Museum team, right, could have just kind of, here are your belongings and take it and then you go, right? But we've kind of developed this relationship together, and our work together has been, it's the return itself, you know, our work has been mutual and reciprocal. So if it wasn't for their support and their solidarity, even with us and the return, you know, we wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been so easy. And so this is a really good example of rematriation and the way we're kind of working together to bring home and reconnect with land and people.
Oh, Gef Pogoeno, Sidus Mase. That was a great definition and example. And so let's talk then about specifically about the Hornbostel sort of return. Um, and I think there's so much that we can talk about it. I would just wanted to put up sort of was this last year? Oh my goodness, this was from last year. I've got typhoon time and I've got 5 kids time. So and sleep apnea time. So my sense of time is off. But this was last year. Hungan, this was ahead of the Lati return. This was and so talk to us about um I don't know how much attention you want to give to Hornbostel himself, because I know you've done research about Hornbostel. You're preparing for an exhibit that we're going to have at the museum about the collection and so on, the return, the rematriation, all of this. But sort of give us some context for this, because I know that this here is you, the Lieutenant Governor of Guam, Josh Tenorio. There's Lenny Leon, who's the head of the director for the NMI Museum, Melvin Wampat Borja, the president of the Department of Chamorro Affairs. And so this is kind of like an important moment in terms of bringing the Lati and the artifacts home. And so talk to us about this rematriation. You've already given us an important context for how this is different than even just the return of the ancestral remains in 2000, which
Yeah.
was much more along the lines of like a repatriation, like, yeah, okay, here, you can have this stuff. And this one is a much closer relationship, and much more community based. And so talk to us about this.
Yeah. So, well, you know, real quick, you know, kind of going back to, let me talk about this, but just, you know, really quick to rematriation. I just have to add too, it's also a process, right? So, I mean, it's ongoing, right? Like I think we, the ideal, the ideal is to practice rematriation, but there, you know, there are times when that's not the case. And so uh you know, just to kind of add that, I think we're always striving to practice rematriation, and it takes constant work. So I just had to add that, you know, we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But yeah, this we had a few visits to Hawaii, and this picture was the one of the latest ones, when it was the official return, and all the lieutenant governor had and a representative from the CNMI governor's office had come out to be a part of the official return. So this was that moment when the collection was officially returned to the people of Guam and the people of the CNMI. So there was also
And then, but yeah, as you said, this was just the most recent because you
yes,
also,
yes.
this is during FestPac. And if you want to also give context for this, because this was part of the working relationship, right? Giving access to people. So go ahead.
Yeah. And then this photo here was before that official return, when the papers were signed and it was officially returned. And this was also a really special moment too, because this was during FestPac. And this is when a lot of our community, the FestPac delegation who were in Hawaii, got to see these pieces for the first time. So a lot of people who were already in Hawaii, they were invited to the Bishop Museum to see these pieces. And so the FestPac happened around the same time as a really important summit that was happening in Hawaii called Protecting Oceania. So a lot of us here in this photograph were here for that conference, and there was a lot going on during FestPac. Where you had FestPac, and you had this summit of indigenous and decolonizing sort of ideas on protecting Oceania. So you have Julian here and some members of Putehi, Maneka, Flores, uh, and then Ursula Herrera, Isa Areola, and then of course our beloved Auntie Frances, who was in this photo, and so before her passing, and when we were thinking of what pieces to come home first, of course, we thought about that pictograph that you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. And there was also this piece, it was my brains, my brains,
The
uh,
Hanam, the
I can only think
Hanam,
about no,
the
the
pottery,
mortar, the lusong, the
oh,
lusong. My
the
brains. So
putot,
you
the
can see
putot.
the putut, yeah, the putut, and I remember Auntie Frances when she visited this, and she had her hands on it, she was really connecting with it too. So this is one of the pieces that we brought home for her, and yeah, it was really great for during FestPac for our, and protecting Oceania Summit for our community to really first see these pieces that were already on their way home. Some of these other photos uh, show some of the pieces that are yet to come home, but on their way. A lot of these sling stones, the thousands and thousands of sling stones, those are still in Hawaii, but those will be coming home very soon. And so we're working together with the Bishop Museum on, uh, kind of reconciling their records. And that'll help us too, because when the pieces come over, the records will follow. And so a lot of the work that we would have had to do is already going to be done. So these sling stones here, there's even a pottery here that has like a scalloped edge. Let's see, I think that's number 10. This pottery here has yet to come home, but this is another piece. They're going to be working now on building a crate that will have a lot more pottery to come home. So they're packing that out. Again, reconciling the catalog and records that they have, and we'll be working with them on that.
No, this is it's I mean, even I think when we're talking about, you know, I like the way you were defining rematriation and community access participation, because in when I think about museums in the past, the community participation is that people visit the museum, and that's about it. Oh, and maybe you buy a tote bag or you buy a
Mm.
keychain. and that's your participation in it. And so even if the museum has been in your city or your county or where you're at for a while, the museum isn't really supposed to represent you. It's not supposed to, and so the Guam Museum, though, is meant to be the museum for the Chamorro people and for our story and for our heritage. And so our responsibility is different. And so I think it's critical then, that, and that's why even just thinking then about this image here, because this was one of man, there was more than half a dozen visits like this during FestPac, where more than 100 people got to visit the artifacts for the first time. And what was particularly powerful about that is that the Hornbostel collection had been, for like a century, incredibly difficult for Chamorros to see because, like, Chamorros who had gone to the University of Hawaii and known that there was artifacts would request to see them, and they would be told that they had to give the particular number for what they wanted to see in order to see what, and then they wouldn't be given the catalog though, so they wouldn't know. So it was kind of like this thing to gatekeep and keep the people out, because even in the 90s, people like Lisa Natividad and others who were part of the eventual return of the ancestral remains in 2000 said that they would ask, and the Bishop Museum would still put up walls at that time to prevent access like this. Like, you have more than 10,000 Chamorro artifacts, but you're not letting the Chamorro people see them, and they're not on display. And so what was beautiful for the Bishop Museum side was a recognition that they have so much. And it's kind of appalling that they have so
Yeah.
much, and that Chamorros for so long haven't been able to. And it was an important recognition then that they make space, and that they went against, or they adjusted some of their own rules to allow lots of their people's cousins by the dozens to come in and see the artifacts. And so even like, they had rules where it's like, oh, maybe just 5 people at once, and it's like, what about 20 people?
Yeah. No, it's so true. Yeah, no, it's so true. And I'm just laughing. We've really seen this incredible shift, right? Like when we first um, when we first went to the museum and in 2022, even before we had gone out in 2022, um, like I was making these requests for some of these pieces, and I wasn't getting, the same response. So we've seen this incredible shift in the Bishop Museum from like not really hearing from anybody to all of a sudden like, inviting it in, and it's inviting us in. And it's true, like we started off with like 5 or 6 people, and then suddenly it was like 5 or 6 groups. And then it was like, hey, do you guys have a pala pala? Hey, can you guys do you think you guys can provide food? Like we were like, we went from like, it's been this really incredible shift. And part of that, even thinking in terms of rematriation, like that really represents that Chamorro and Kanaka Maoli relations and Indigenous solidarity, even in terms of righting wrongs and like the colonial museum setting and in colonial museum practices, right? So yeah, it's been a really great shift, and it's been, great to be a part of that.
Oh yes, oh yes. And as you said, and I think people are very excited to hear, especially Sir Roman de la Cruz and the Slingers of Guam are excited to hear that thousands of slingstones may be coming home later this year. But we don't want to take away from the fact that more than 100 artifacts, including, as you said, some of the most unique artifacts. So thousands of slingstones are coming home. There's still thousands of artifacts that have not yet been brought back to the Marianas. But you were the lead person in terms of selecting which would be prioritized in the first wave. And these were the hornbostel pieces that we don't have in our collection, or people would be very excited or amazed to see, such as this piece right here,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
people today are very they're familiar with certain types of shells and certain types of stone that our ancestors used, but talk to us about this piece, because when people saw this, when it was on temporary display in the lobby of the museum, people were like, Hafesti, is this like an alien thing? It blew people's minds. And so I was glad that you identified this and you brought this one back.
Oh yeah. So, and kind of looking at the pieces that the Bishop Museum had, and even at that point, in a starting point, we weren't even really sure of like everything they had. So there are still pieces that we're looking at that they're kind of bringing out of the drawers that we're seeing for the first time. But when we first visited the Bishop Museum, we had asked to see, of course, body ornamentation, the spondylus, some of the more decorated pottery, and of course the pictograph, the pictograph that was taken from Talafofo Cave, which is the image that artist Key Soswiko took that we used for the flyer for today's Fanachu. That's a few of us at Talafofo Cave when we went to go and look for the area where Hornbostel had chiseled out the pictograph. So the pictograph was one of the pieces that we asked for, and then of course this piece here, I believe from Inarahan, that Hornbostel had taken from Inarahan. So we're really just scratching the surface to find out more about these pieces. We are going to be looking into the Hornbostel field notes to find out hopefully exactly where Hornbostel had taken this very unique and special piece here. It's identified as a bead. So we're looking into that more, or we'll have to look into that more. And we'll have to reach out to the people of Inarahan too, like any families who there might have been someone might have found a piece just like this from Inarahan to kind of give us a sense of like where do you find them and what they other uses for it besides ornamental. So, we've still got a lot of that work to do to kind of reconnect with people from the villages and throughout the island on pieces like this. So, yeah, this is one of the pieces that have come home, and um, these are some of the other pieces that have come home too. Again, we did prioritize the spondylus beads. So these are some of the larger spondylus beads from Inarahan, from Tuman. There's a piece here also from Hagåtña, which I thought was really special too. I believe it's that piece right there in the middle. And then the bottom right corner, the pink tata, which you do see a lot of as well. There was a pink tata that was associated with one of the burials at Naton. This pink tata here is from Inarahan again. So, you see where Hornbostel had visited, and those will be some of the things that we're gonna include in the upcoming exhibition on uh kind of recollecting and reclaiming some of these pieces in this exhibit that's going to be the history of collecting. So here's here's the same pictada from Inarahan that Vanessa Dueñas took this image just a couple of days ago to try to capture the details, and this will be an image that we could possibly use for our official catalog. Some of the pieces that are going to be coming in are these fish hooks. We haven't received these yet, and we weren't even aware that these were part of the Hornbostel collection because the page in his field notes was torn out and included directly with the pieces, and it was in another collection room at the Bishop Museum. So all of these beautiful fish hooks, different shapes here, and which are, as we know, they're not as common to find as some of the lithics. So, we're getting to know all of these pieces, all of us, right? As like collectively, like as an island, as a community, we're all gonna get to know these pieces a little bit more, and the why these pieces are so special, and kind of like because these are our belongings, and what is it going to tell us about our own identity and our own experiences as Chamorros living today. So there's even the field note page from Hornbostel's notes here. So this was included. So all those fish hooks, according to this, were taken from Dano, from Cocos Island. So again, getting to know all these pieces again, as a community, the people from Molesto, the people of Guam, like all of us getting to know these pieces together.
That is so that is so amazing because when you think then to find all of these fish hooks there and then to think what could have been, and that's it's the because sometimes people say, oh, it's great that Hornbostel took this stuff because it's preserved, but then at the same time his notes are so sparse and his notes are so like and he just kind of grabbed things and you don't and sometimes when you see like where did he find it, you're suspicious like the depth at which he found it at. Did he really find it at this depth and so on, and so you wonder about it because it would have been better if somebody who was really invested in understanding like Chamorro history,
Mhm.
because man, to find all of these amazing fish hooks at Donu, it's
Yeah.
like, wow, it really makes you wonder. This would have been a huge fishing hub then. But like what the depth at which you find them, how you find them, how they're arranged, and so on, are there places? And so all of that matters in terms of how we can use this to put together the story or lost. And it, well, yeah, but he was just kind of grabbing as much as he could. Oh,
Yeah, it was still a taking. It was still a theft. And I
so,
don't
oh, go
think
ahead.
we can use. Yeah, no, it was still a taking. It was still a theft. So, we shouldn't let Hornbostel off the fish hook, so to speak. I mean, there has been some mention that oh, it's a good thing he took it, because it kept it away. If he didn't take it, it could have been ruined or destroyed during the war. And I don't know if we should really go down that the way of thinking. We need to remind ourselves it was still theft. I think just going back to these practices in rematriation, I think, it's where we can sort of now get to know these pieces more. And that's through like providing ceremony, doing the research, coming together to see these pieces and reconnect and reconnect and connect to place, right? Because as we're going through this massive military buildup, and we're seeing such a destruction and a desecration and loss of land, it's so important to kind of, not separate these pieces from place and from history, and to kind of keep in mind, like, the context in which these were taken. So yeah, that's my thinking around it, like as we, yeah.
No, no, Sidus Mase. And I do want to give you a chance though, because one of the you mentioned the military buildup, and so you are also part of the group Protehi Guahan, and Protehi Guahan has been incredibly supportive about repatriation and taken a strong stance on these sorts of issues, that this is part of decolonization, this is part of, justice and so on. And also Guahan has taken a very strong stance too on issues about the buildup, programmatic agreement, historic preservation, and so on. And so, how do you see these sorts of issues kind of and coming together with your work and within the museum, outside of the museum? I know that some people find that that they should be separate, but I find that to be like silly. Because if
Yeah.
you think that something should be protected within a museum, then why don't you think that it should be protected outside either? And so I wanted to give you a chance to talk on about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's all connected. It's all connected. Kind of how you mentioned, you know, we don't really want to remove the pieces from the land and then take them and put them on the shelf at the repository. That's not the ideal. We'd rather keep them in the land and so we have that connection, right? So but we've had to kind of act in this practice because of the displacement of these pieces. And Pratehi Guahan and Maneka Flores and the team are doing such important work, even with the recent lawsuits, which you can find more information on Pratehi Guahan's Instagram account. Even around deep sea mining. So again, it's all connected. And Pratehi protecting the ocean, the land. They have also been very supportive of the hornbostel return to, and on the last I think it was the last visit that I had, they had sent me out. They're also providing support for this upcoming hornbostel history of collecting uh, exhibit. And yeah, now we're seeing this new draft programmatic agreement. And one of the things that really sticks out in this is we're not what's being drafted right now is that we're not going to have the final say on any research requests around our Chamorro ancestral remains, our ancestors. So, that's one of the things that really sticks out to people right away. There are other issues with it, but that's one of the main things, right? If somebody wants to do research on our ancestral remains that were found at the Marine base, that we're not going to really have a say in that, right? That they're going to be able to just request it from the DoD Cultural Resource Manager and maybe one person, from our side, which is the SHPO. So there's a lot of these issues. They're all interconnected, and so that's why this kind of work is so important. And um, as we are looking at kind of decolonizing ways that we do this work and work in museums, and kind of goes down to back to like the issue of consultation, right? Like if we're always looking for meaningful consultation, and these kinds of issues. And the same in kind of like decolonizing these spaces, always consulting with our community and always kind of bringing them in, whether it's from a specific collection from a village, or pieces coming home, centering place, providing ceremony, centering people and descendants, and always consulting with our families and our relatives and our community, right?
No, Sidus Mase. Now, we've had a few questions that have come in, but we don't have much time for too many of them. But this is one though that I wanted to give you a chance to answer, and it's actually for both of us. But I want to hand it off to you. It says, Dr. Maggette, Nikki, have you felt a spiritual connection to any particular artifact or any particular part of the collection? So is there anything that has been returned or anything that has been part of the collection, like at the repository, that you have felt a particularly strong connection to?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think working in this place every day, you feel a connection, and you feel you know, things moving and kind of following you around. But the pottery piece from Hanam, uh, I felt a very strong spiritual connection to that piece, and I've been kind of reaching out to some of the families from Hanam too. Like I was able to bring my own family in, and then reached out to some of the other Taitinos from Hanam to come and visit when they can. But that piece in particular, I did feel a very strong spiritual connection to. How about you?
Oh, wait, hold on.
Oh yeah.
I just want to put that on screen so that people can
Yeah.
put that on, see that, and oh yeah, that's again, and can you tell us a little bit real fast though about why this? I mean, obviously because of your family connections, but then why is this so unique though? Because of the design.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of these sort of humanoid motifs. I only know of two. This one and then another one from, I believe, Nomnia, which there's an image of it in the decolonization exhibition now, right? So we don't see a lot of this, but so when I saw this piece, I was just like, wow. And then I looked a little further into Hornbostel's notes and saw that he took it from a cave at Hanam, and like instantly, like all the stories that I kind of grew up with from Hanam, like all just kind of came like flooding through, like these stories of like, my uncles would tell stories of like the Tautokmona playing tricks on them when they were fishing at the on the La Masa, and like stories of like giants like up on the cliff, and like so when you're down on the bottom of Hanam and then you look up, like these like you could see like these giant figures on top of the cliff kind of like lit up by the moon. So like all these stories that I grew up with just came flooding. So yeah, it was a pretty deep I can't even put into words.
And so there's a question about the dating for the pottery, and so you know, most things that and oh, Nicole, do you want to answer that? The date, a possible date for the pottery?
So from what we're understanding so far, that these are all Lati era, but we'll see the pieces that we looked like the pottery from Hornbostel's taking, that this is all Lati era, uh and like some of the information that, like for instance, William Hernandez has given us, that like this is kind of surface archaeology that he was taken, but we know he did some digging and they were all digging around Lati, like he saw Lati and that's kind of where he knew where to dig. So our understanding is that this is Lati era, some of this pottery, but we'll learn more too when yeah, we can learn more about like the more we only have a few pieces of pottery from Hornbostel, but as we get the next wave and more pottery, we can get a sense of some of the other pieces like the Anadara, I'm sorry, the Pinctada shell. I know that's really associated with pre-Lati. So we're learning more.
For me, if I had to pick one, it would definitely be the pictograph. Would have to be the pictograph
Yeah.
because I even got the tattoo. I even got a tattoo for it. And because as and for me, what makes this and one of the reasons why I think, and somebody, one of the comments that we got from this is, telling our stories, we want to remember our stories. And so part of the reason why it's so important to talk about this is because it's not just that we want the items themselves, but we also want to kind of highlight the stories around them. And for me, what I love about this pictograph is that when we saw it, when we heard about it, And when me and Nicole started to work towards getting all of this collection back, stories emerged from Chamorros and also from people at the Bishop Museum that this piece was something which, because for the 10,000 plus items, artifacts that Hornbostel took, so few of them were ever put on display. But the pictograph, because it's a larger piece, it's an interesting piece, they would put it on display. But this was a piece that sometimes Chamorros, when they would see it, they would ask questions about it because it's carved out of a wall. And when you think sometimes that Chamorros in the past, they wouldn't stand up and they wouldn't ask questions and they wouldn't be taimamala, this was something where Chamorros would go and say, hey, dispensa engentiun lololo nai taimanu and suliesti magi hadzimunaya esti. Who gave you this? How did you get this? How did this end up here? And so the fact that for so many of the pieces we haven't heard, we haven't had a chance, but we're going to see if there's stories attached to them, like Nicole was saying. But this was something where stories came out right away because even what is his name? See, Vic
Mhm.
Torres or Vic Torres. Again, he said that when he went in the 90s, he asked questions about it too. And then others before him, when they saw it, asked questions about it. And so I always felt, ever since then, I was like, this is. And then when we visited the spot too and saw it and saw how there's paintings all over the place, paintings all over the place. And so this is a pictograph. We assume that what this drawing is that this is meant to be an aniti. This is a drawing of an ancestral spirit. And it was carved out of a wall in an area in Talafofo where there are cave drawings in that cave and then in other caves too. So it is a very sacred, rich in spirit. It's an area that is rich in spirits.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love about Nicole and her approach is, that from the moment that that pictograph came home, Nicole was trying to find the family who owns that property and then see like how can we connect with them? Are there any stories? Do they want to visit with it? Do they want to see it? You were already talking about let's bring it, can we bring it back to that site so that we can reconnect to that site and connect it to the family? And I wanted to just I know that we haven't necessarily done that yet, but I wanted to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we were thinking about bringing this piece back to the place, right? And we were going to do that with the family. We're going to contact the mayor's office, so we can still do that. I think, but what's so interesting about this piece in particular and this place is like I think all the pieces sort of bring out the spiritual connection for sure, and it seems like you know we. We definitely do the work of reaching out to people, but like a lot of times it's like the piece or like calls people, like because I just remember I was sitting in the lab one day with that pictograph, and I was like, who are the families associated with this place? And at that time, I didn't know. I hadn't connected with anybody yet. I didn't know who the families were, and we were going to reach out to the mayor's office, right? And then, Mr. Paulino, the HVAC person, like went walking by, and like it was like the spark, and as he was walking by, I kind of like stopped him, and oh, Mr. Paulino, gosh, I know you're from down south. I know you're from in Arahan. Can I ask you, like, do you know the family associated with the Talafofo cave? And he was like, oh yeah, that's my family. And I was like, so it's like you also like, we do this work for sure. We like reach out to people, but for sure the pieces are like calling out to the family and to the people also, and we had that same experience with Martin Napati from Saipan when, we were in Hawaii together, and he had found the large lati from Luta. It was kind of hidden in the back, and we all know, the story of how he was, it was like it called out to him. And we have these spiritual connections, and then these pieces also like definitely, kind of call out to people too, and kind of call out to us as well.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Just that idea that the we are trying to connect, but the pieces, the spirits are trying to connect too. Oh,
Yeah.
guftsahua now, guftsahua now. Now we are just about out of time, but I want to give you a chance now to share any final thoughts, any final message that you have, or things that you're working on, because you know in the time that you've been working at the repository, and the time that you've been at this, you've already been part of a number of returns, but there's plenty of exciting stuff going on. So if whatever you'd like to share, para iutin mo na sinangan mo, por favor.
I think we still have so much work to do. At here at the repository, at the museum, and just in the community. There's still a lot of work ahead of us. But I think if, to kind of end here, there are these amazing, there are these shifts happening. There are these shifts happening in the museum that are allowing for these returns, uh, and then there are also these shifts happening politically, again, which are related to all of our work. And so, I think just kind of keeping that in mind, that um, we're all kind of waking up, and doing doing kind of like reconnecting and you know, thinking about things in terms of decolonization, self-determination, and land back. So, I mean, I think I just kind of end it there. There's this amazing shift happening, and so if all of us just kind of like how the artifacts, or the pieces are kind of calling out. This is a time where these issues, we're at this important moment now in the world where things are kind of calling out to all of us. So, I guess just kind of ending on that note, to kind of reconnect and kind of listen to it and stand when you can, so everybody needs to kind of uh, stand up for these things when they can.
Biba, biba. Hey, day. Si Diyos masi, Nicole, para pinato mo para este episode, za si Diyos masi put totally bidada mo para repository, museo, zan para itautauta lokwe. Za si Diyos masi para hamzo todos ni umeega zan umeekung kesti na episode fanatsu esti fanakpo. Adios. Este ki mana lihi tatlu esta.
Adiós.